Good afternoon. All right, there's some power behind that. Good afternoon. Woohoo! Welcome to Lunch with Books. Please turn off your cell phones. If you're not on our email list and would like to be, there's a dilapidated old box over there that Sean loves. Just pop your name and email address in that box, and we'll get you added to the email list. This Thursday at 7 via Zoom, instructor Daniel C. Abel is Distinguished Professor Emeritus of Marine Science at Coastal Carolina University in Conway, South Carolina. We'll discuss sharks and rays for our third People's University Marine Biology class. Then next Tuesday, March 10th at Lunch with Books, the Wheeling Poetry Series returns to welcome Pittsburgh-based poet Jim Daniels. The poetry series is curated and hosted by West Virginia Poet Laureate Mark Harshman. Today we welcome Dr. Pamela Manners and Dr. Richard Bernard to discuss their novel Heirlooms, which uses treasures from an old family chest to tell the forgotten stories of 8 generations of American frontier women. Heirlooms is the third novel by Dr. Manners, a retired professor of psychology at Troy University in Alabama. She lives in Alabama with her husband, David Smart. Pam's childhood friend, Dr. Richard Bernard, is her co-author, professor of history and graduate dean emeritus at the University of Central Oklahoma. Dr. Bernard has held several administrative posts, including vice president for academic affairs at Bethany College, West Virginia, from 1989 to 1993. He and his wife, Terry, live in Richard and Pam's hometown of Edmond, Oklahoma. The women of Heirlooms are loosely based on Dr. Bernard's ancestors. The authors have copies for sale after the program at $12 apiece. Please welcome Dr. Pamela Manners and Dr. Richard Bernard.
I just turned on my mic. Can you all hear me? I'm not usually a microphone person, so we'll see. I'm so happy to be here. This is my first trip to West Virginia. And I want to thank Julia and Nanette and the library, and also Sean, who's off enjoying early spring in Rome, instead of here where it's still winter. I've even more so been looking forward to this because it's Women's History Month. And I'm an advocate for women. I taught psychology of women for over 20 years. And I want to tell you a little bit about how the book came to be, to start with. And feel free, if you have any questions or comments, let me know, because I like the dialogue, if you have anything you want to say as I'm going along. As was said, I'm a retired psychology professor and an accidental writer. I started writing as a post-retirement diversion. I was at loose ends. I did a lot of knitting, and I had needed to do something else, so I started writing. My first book, which I'm going to show you here, is Emmy's Time. It's about my paternal grandmother, who, as she said to me, "Honey, I had a life that would stop a clock." And so I wrote one. She was not around when I wrote it, but I'm sure she was laughing up in heaven. It spans the years from 1913 to 1934, so it was her girlhood into early womanhood. And it was a riotous time in Oklahoma, if you know anything about that, and it's set in the rural part of the state. It took me 5 years from the first outline to the finished book. It was longer than I expected. I dedicated this book to my grandmother and also to my granddaughter, who's named for her. So I like to think of this book as going, down the generations, and I hope that someday my granddaughter will read it. She hasn't yet, but she's young. So, and after that, I was hooked on writing, and I was casting about for another project. And so I decided to write a prequel to Emmy's Time, because there's a prologue in Emmy's Time that's not very long, but it has a lot of information. And so I expanded that into another book, my second one, called Five Roads, which I also have here. Five Roads is it starts shortly before the War of 1812, and it ends just after the turn of the 20th century. So it's a good long chunk of time. And it's set in Missouri and Arkansas and Oklahoma and briefly in Natchez, Mississippi. So I spent 6 years working on this book. And during that time, we had the pandemic, which took my mother at age 92. And then 2 days later, my dog, she didn't die of COVID, but my dog died 2 days later. Her name was Rita. And she was under my desk the whole time I wrote this book. So I dedicated the book to her and to my mother. So Richard read both of my books. And after he read Five Roads, he asked me if I would like to collaborate on something similar about his family. And I agreed, because again, I was looking for a project. So we started with an enormous pile of genealogical data going back about 1,000 years. I believe that the Bernards must be the Zelig of history, because they seem to have a connection to every major event, including the Norman Conquest. So it was a lot of stuff to go through. And so we spent 6 months or so emailing back and forth, because I live in Alabama, he lives in Oklahoma. So we emailed back and forth, trying to decide how to pare it down to a single volume, something that was manageable in just a single volume. And of course, we had different perspectives on this. He started with the historian's imperative for accuracy. I was more focused on the flow of the story. And as a psychologist, I wanted to make sure that the characters were plausible and likable, and less concerned with matching the exact timeline. But I've known Richard since we were in kindergarten, and so we managed to get through it. And if you don't believe us, here's a picture, our author's picture in Heirlooms, if I can get it up here. This is us in a school play. So, you know, we go way back, and so we persevered through all the back and forth, and finally got there. One of the main issues for negotiation was truth versus fact. I believe that truth and fact are not necessarily exactly the same thing. I think a thing can be true without being literally factual. And so I focus on exploring the relational and personal aspects of the characters. And Richard leaned more toward fitting them into verifiable events. And so we wrestled with this for a while, probably about a year, would you say? And maybe till the end of the book, I don't know, until we were both going in the right direction, or a similar direction, okay? Another thing was we had stipulated that no one in the book could have the same name, no character could have the same name as a real ancestor, and there were a lot of real ancestors. And so I relied on my neighbors and friends and appropriated their names for the characters in the book, and also some of my relatives. And finally, we settled on the idea of the women in Richard's family tree, and we chose 8 of them to illustrate the Bernard's experience in America. So we went from 1,000 pages of raw data down to about 170 pages of finished book. And we hope we got everything in. Then there was the conundrum, of course, of what to do about the Bernards had land and they had money and they lived in Virginia, so they had slaves. And so I was concerned with how to convey the reality of that while not dehumanizing either the enslaved or the Bernards. And so I don't know how long I spent worrying about that, probably the whole time. And in the end, I invented a family who had been intimately bound to the Olivers. That's the Bernard's name in the book. So I invented this family who had been with them, owned by them over generations, and let them tell their story over several chapters. So they go in and out. And I like those characters a lot. And in addition, I brought 2 of my favorite secondary characters from Five Roads into the last chapter of Heirlooms because sometimes the character just demands to come back. So I brought 2 of those back, and they have a different role in this book. Well, same role, but different events in this book. The idea of using a cedar chest, let me just have a sip here, a cedar chest full of family artifacts as a vehicle to drive the story came from a couple of sources. My mother had a cedar chest, known as a hope chest, that she got as a teenager, and filled over the years with all manner of things. Pictures, my baby clothes, her grandmother's girlhood diary, and so on. And as a child, I used to love to look through that with her and hear the stories that went along with everything in there. The other source was an old novel by James Michener. Any James Michener fans in here? Okay, did you ever read The Tell? It's a very old one. I read it in high school. It's called The Tell, T-E-L. And in The Tell, objects found in an archaeological dig serve to tell the history of Palestine. So I figured that will work. We'll use a cedar chest instead of an archaeological dig. But it'll still be the same delving and picking out and having the objects, tell the story. So that's what we did. The only character that I invented from scratch is Sylvia Holt. She's a young historian who works for the Federal Writers Project during the Great Depression. And her job is to interview people who had been pioneers in the late 1800s. And she's assigned to collect the story of Hazel Oliver, who is based on Richard's grandmother, Florence Bernard. I'm going to read a couple of passages here to introduce those 2, rather than just try to describe them. This is from the very beginning of the book. Hazel was feeling her age. The December weather was cold, and a howling wind swept down from the north. Her joints ached, and so did her heart. Today was her birthday, her 65th, and she should have been celebrating with her dear husband, Teddy, who had been born a year to the day after her own arrival. But Teddy had died months ago. Now she was alone in the house where they had lived together for over 40 years. She picked up the envelope from the corner of the kitchen counter where mail accumulated. It bore an Oklahoma City postmark, although the return address was United States government. Hazel had read the letter over several times since its arrival last month, but she took it out of the envelope and unfolded it again just to be sure. Here's the letter, November 15th, 1937. Dear Mrs. Oliver, the Federal Writers Project, under the Works Progress Administration, has, at the direction of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, established a program to collect oral histories from Americans who settled the frontier, bringing it into the modern age. You have been selected for this project because of your homesteading in the unassigned lands of Oklahoma Territory in 1889. We believe that you have an important story to tell, one that should be preserved for future generations. I will be in your area in mid-December and would like to visit you in your home for an interview. Please return the enclosed postcard stating that you agree to be part of this vital historical project. I have designated December 16th for our meeting and plan to arrive at your home at 9 a.m. The interview will take about 2 hours, but may be extended if we have more to talk about. Thank you in advance for your willingness to meet with me. I look forward to seeing you on December 16th. Sincerely yours, Miss Sylvia Holt, historian, Federal Writers Project. Hazel was no particular fan of Franklin Roosevelt, regarding him as a Yankee libertine who spent her hard-earned tax dollars too freely. But she had to acknowledge somewhat grudgingly that without the government assistance that he had poured into Oklahoma, things would be much worse. She was curious, though, about Miss Sylvia Holt. What sort of young woman spent her time listening to old ladies talk about life on the prairie? And why wasn't she making a proper life of her own instead of gallivanting around the countryside by herself? She would never understand today's young people, not even her own children. So she returned the postcard mostly out of curiosity. Hazel sighed and moved to the stove. At Teddy's insistence, they had spent good money on it just last year, as soon as their part of Canadian County got electricity, even though she had been perfectly content to use the wood stove that had served them well all their married life. She filled the percolator with water from the kitchen faucet, another unnecessary luxury in her opinion, ground some coffee beans, and scooped them into the basket. She took a tin of Christmas cookies from the shelf next to the icebox and arranged a half dozen on a plate. Never let it be said that she was anything but a gracious hostess. The aroma of fresh brewed coffee filled the air. Hazel looked out of her front window at the dirt road that ran past her house. Just visible in the near distance was the dust cloud that heralded the imminent arrival of Miss Holt. It was 2 minutes before 9. So that's Hazel. And it's a little bit about Sylvia, then we'll go on. Sylvia Holt stopped her government-issued car in front of Mrs. Oliver's home and sat there for a moment, looking around as the dust she had stirred up settled back onto the road. She had learned not to get out right away, lest she be covered in red grit. The dwelling itself was a neat frame construction that had the look of a farmhouse, but there were none of the outbuildings that would normally be arrayed behind it. No barn, no stable, no windmill turning in the stiff breeze. It looked as though the town had grown outward, eventually encroaching on the property. Most likely the Olivers had sold off their acreage for development. She would be sure to ask Mrs. Oliver about that. She was pleased, though, to see that the house was attached to the line that ran alongside the road, which meant that she could use her new telegraphone, the bulky magnetic wire sound recording machine. Sylvia enjoyed being part of the writer's project, despite having to lug the bulky machine with her across the plains. Only a few interviewers were given a recorder, and so she lugged it with pride. She was a newly minted degree, a graduate of Southwestern State Teachers College in Weatherford with a degree in history. This seemed like a good way to expand her knowledge while she waited for the chance to get a real job in her field. She got out of the car, straightened her spine, and smoothed her skirt. She assumed that most of the people she interviewed monitored her approach to their doors, forming a first impression of her that could affect their willingness to be forthcoming in their responses to her questions. Once she had demonstrated her respectability, she reached into the back seat and wrestled out the recorder and her briefcase. She took a deep breath and stepped confidently up to Hazel Oliver's front porch. This is where they meet. And in the book, each story of one of the women is, they're interspersed with Hazel and Sylvia interacting between, so that kind of adds to the story. Okay. Now, there is a local connection to this book, in case you wonder why we're here from there. One of the women in the book is Janet Bass, who lives in Claresville, Ohio, just across the border from where we are today, I think. I've been told that's the case. She's one of Richard's, she was the grandmother of Richard's grandmother. Okay, so she would be the character in the book, Janet Bass, would be the grandmother of Hazel, the person that's being interviewed. She became involved with a scoundrel who drifts into town named Robert Morcom. And so I thought I would introduce those two since they're more local. Any questions or comments before I go on? Anybody? No? I don't want to, yes?
What was the town again?
Claresville? St. Clairsville? Okay. I thought it was St. Clairsville, then I wasn't sure, so I crossed out the St. Okay, that's St. Clairsville. I was right the first time. Okay. Yes? I don't know. That Richard did all the research. He did all the genealogical delving, and we just assumed that would have been the case, and so I tried to include them in a way that was, would make them into real characters. So, we'll see. Anything else before I move? Yes.
Do these characters eventually talk about what's in that thing you found in the hope chest?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. There's a section for Hazel and Sylvia. Then there's a chapter about the first woman who came. And then there's another section of Hazel and Sylvia where another artifact comes out. They talk about it. And then the story of the next woman grows from that. Does that make sense? Okay. Anything else? Okay. Janet. This is right before the around the War of 1812, give or take. Probably after, actually. Janet Bass was a young widow with 2 little children and not enough money to make a good life for them on her own. Her husband Zachary had been a kind but unlucky man. He was the son of indentured servants who had instilled in him the virtue of making his own way. Zachary became a tireless worker, hiring out to a prosperous farmer and eventually saving enough money to buy 20 acres for himself in Belmont County, Ohio. He and Janet lived in a small house belonging to the farmer on the edge of St. Clairsville while he cleared the land. They had dreams of having their own homestead, which they would pass on to their children, thus ensuring a place in the world for future generations. It was a fine day in early spring when the oak tree that Zachary was chopping down fell the wrong way, crushing both of his legs. By the time he was found, the wounds had begun to fester, and he died an agonizing death a week later. So Janet was left with the land, but it was hilly and turned out not to be good for farming. Janet grieved for her husband, whom she had loved dearly. Having no living relatives of her own, she was grateful that the farmer who owned her house allowed her to stay. She might have sold the land, but that would have felt like a betrayal of Zachary and unfair to her children. Her son Jacob and daughter Alice were a comfort to their mother, but they were too young to be of more practical help. She found work wherever she could, taking her children with her when they were not in school. She served customers at the butcher shop every morning. She sewed for her more prosperous neighbors until the light faded in the evening, and she slung beer and waited tables at the Creekside Tavern in the afternoon. She ate less so that her children could eat more. At night, she wept with exhaustion. When Robert Morcom turned up in her far eastern corner of Ohio, she knew an opportunity when she saw it. Okay. Robert's a scoundrel. We're going to get to him next. Anything before I go on? Okay. Robert Morcom's forebears had been among the earliest Quakers to settle in William Penn's colony in Chester County. Not content with the plainness of friends, though, Robert's great-grandfather, George, had moved the prosperous Morcoms into Methodism. Robert was the first of his line to be born in the United States rather than in a colony. And by that time, the Morcom name was synonymous with upstanding piety and community leadership, carrying great weight and commanding the respect of the righteous. Robert, however, had been at odds with his family for most of his life. Despite the efforts of his elders, the boy seemed bound and determined to flout the family's lofty standards, chafing at any sort of propriety. He filched fruits from the greengrocer. He put a snake in his sister's bed. He misbehaved in church. He led a troop of scruffy boys who bullied younger children, striking fear to those caught alone in the street. He slipped around the Pirate's Head, a tavern owned by his uncle, draining tankards left on the table by inattentive patrons. In short, he was rude, disobedient, and disrespectful. Besides his family's good name, the only thing that kept him out of the town jail as he grew from boy to man was the fact of his indisputable charm. He's a charming scoundrel. In an effort to protect their good name, Robert's father hatched a plot to marry his wayward son off to the daughter of a business associate who was eager to combine his own enterprise with that of the powerful Morcoms. It was a good match, except for the fact that the 2 young people barely knew one another and had nothing in common beyond overbearing fathers. Almost from the beginning of his marriage to Abigail, Robert had harbored fanciful thoughts about how he might break away from her. She was not a bad wife. She treated him with respect and had produced 3 children of whom he was fond. He had not acted on these thoughts, mostly out of a sense of obligation and a lack of any other clear plan. Indeed, from the outside, his position seemed enviable. A nice family, a substantial house, and plenty of money to support it all. Nevertheless, he felt deeply unsatisfied. The coming of the war with the British, however, gave new life to his always simmering desire to strike out for something different. When the call went out for men to join local militias, Robert saw his chance. He signed up without consulting his father or any of his brothers, who chose war profiteering over soldiering. Nor did he speak with his wife. On the day he was to report for duty, he extracted a cache of money that he had embezzled over the years and hidden in his cellar. He set aside some for Abigail and left her a note, secured the rest of it in an oilskin money belt, and never looked back. By the time Robert appeared in St. Clairsville, it had been 8 years since he walked away from his life in Pennsylvania. He did not miss it, although he sometimes wondered idly what had become of his family. He imagined Abigail adopting the role of war widow, making the most of his presumed heroic demise in battle. He gave little thought to his daughter and 2 sons. They would, no doubt, have believed whatever story their mother had told them about his leaving. Once free of the army, Robert had traveled the country, living by his wits. He joined a band of fur trappers and went up the Missouri River on a flatboat. He spent a winter in a Crow village in Montana. He signed on with the survey crew and helped lay out the grid that brought order to the land of the Louisiana Purchase. Eventually, he tired of being an outdoorsman and drifted east, where life was more civilized. Belmont County, Ohio, had elements of both frontier life and an established town. It seemed like an ideal place to settle, at least for a while. He thought he might even try his hand at the coal mining business, which was beginning to take shape in that part of the country. If anyone had asked him about his past, Robert was vague, saying only that he had been in a few skirmishes in the war against the British and omitted any mention of Chester County, Pennsylvania. If pressed, he turned the conversation to his travels in the West. And that's Robert. And these two get together, and chaos ensues. What can I say? But we have Richard, as an end result of all that. Okay, anything else you want to know about this? I don't want to give too much else of the story away, so I'm not going to read further. But I'd be happy to talk or answer some questions from you.
Okay, hold on. If you have questions, raise your hand. Nobody has any questions? Okay.
The fact that you're awake after that long reading, I think, is validation enough. Okay, Richard's already been introduced, so I won't repeat that, but I'm going to turn things over to him.
Okay, we do have one question.
Oh, yes.
What was in the hope chest?
In the book?
Yeah.
Oh, let's see, we have a traveling bag, we have a sewing kit, we have a pack of letters. One chapter is written entirely in letters. We have a diary. One chapter is written entirely as a diary. A hairbrush and mirror, just knickknacks, things that you would accumulate over a long life, over many long lives. And each one of them has a story to tell. Anything else?
Anybody else have a question? Okie doke. Thanks.
All right, thank you. I'll turn my. Do you want this, or are you going to use that one? Okay.
Can you hear me with this one? Sounds okay. All right. All right. Well, I'm from the history side of this book, not the literature side, and I want to fill you in on a little bit of what happened and how it matches up with the story that's been told in Heirlooms. Our tale actually starts in Jamestown, and if you look in your characters list, we're going to start right at the top there of number 1. She's called Franny Strickland in the book. She's Cecilia Reynolds Bailey to me. She comes over in that first boatload of women that were sent to Jamestown. They sent a bunch of men over. That did not work out. They fought with one another. They fought with the Indians. They drank too much. It's time to bring the women. So they did, and among them was Cecilia. As it happens, Cecilia turned out to be the belle of the ball in Jamestown. She turned out to be a prize catch, captured by a plantation owner. Yes, slaves, overseers, a whole bit, and she marries him. As it happens, though, he was older and died rather soon, and in the process of making the funeral, the minister made a pass at her. He essentially asked her to marry him. She said something like, you probably know worse than the rest of these yahoos. He took that as a yes, and he told all of his friends, and that made for a rather difficult situation. She denied it, absolutely, and he tried to make her stick to it. They went to court. The court case went to London. It came back. They didn't know what I'm telling you about America's first breach of promise suit. Well, as it happens, the minister finally gave up, married someone else. His end was a sad one as he lost his life in the Indian raid. But as for Cecilia, or Fanny as she's called here, she moves the overseer into her bedroom, and they begat a line that includes George Washington, and Neil Patrick Harris, and me. Now, let's slip a notch there to number 2. I know her as Elizabeth Barrett, or Rosemary Lowry, if you will. She was about to get married. She's a plantation daughter. Her mother has a long-time servant who works in the house. That woman has a daughter her own age. They play together as children. But it's time for Rosemary to get married. And her mother knows she's going to move to Kentucky. She's going to have help. She's going to have some servants. She gave her servant's daughter. And off they went to Kentucky. Imagine how that was like. Skipping over to the right side, the right column, we find Janet Morecambe, as she turns out to be. I know her as Hannah Kidwell Butler. She is a working woman. In real life, I know more about her than we tell about in the book. She had 3 children by 2 men before we met her. And then she falls in love with this fellow, John Haddam, or Robert Morecambe, who doesn't turn out to be the greatest of sorts. He's abandoned his family after the War of 1812, met her, and they moved to Belmont County. Things you think now are going to be all right. They're going to go well. And they did for about 5 years until the Robert character found another woman about 2 counties northwest of there. And off he went to be lost to us in the record books. Well, if we jump over then to family number 4, we call her Beatrice Ayers here, Millie Crutzen and Jessie Booker Bernard. This family had 14 children, and Millie was just exhausted. She eventually died in childbirth there. Her husband was a local justice of the peace. Millie's sister had died, and Millie's sister's husband had to look after the children. He was not good at it. And Millie's husband took those children away from his brother-in-law. Imagine what that would have been like at Christmas. That would have been a lot of fun, wouldn't it? Family number 5 there. We pick up Nancy Bernard Chastain and Benjamin Lewis and his first wife, Emmeline Cloud. Let me sidetrack just a second, move back on Emmeline Cloud. If you follow the blue back up there, you'll see Dorothy King and William Waller, who lived in Pennsylvania in a time when slavery was legal. And according to local historians, they owned a slave by the name of Kunta Kinte. And yes, that is Roots. That is Alex Haley's ancestor. Bringing that family on down a little bit, the family on down a little bit from generations, we come to the Clouds. And Nancy and Daniel Cloud had 8 children. One of them was Daniel Jr. He became a lawyer. Couldn't find a whole lot of work, though, in Kentucky. Moved on to Illinois. How about something in Missouri? Not too good there. But he went to a meeting one night where a man named Sam Houston spoke. And Sam Houston talked of Texas. And he caught Texas fever and joined a bunch of men, went down, and along with him, he died at the Alamo. But before he got there, he wrote a letter home to his parents saying essentially what he was doing and why. It became Texas Why We Fight letter. You can see it in the Alamo in a glass case in San Antonio. So that was the younger son in the family. How are we going to do, what's going to happen to the daughter? Well, she won't stay in our story very long. She marries, again has a bunch of children, 5 of them, and dies at 29 in childbirth. But is a story we pick up with the second wife then, Nancy Bernard Chastain, herself a widow, who comes in with Benjamin, and they moved with, we call him Clement here, and they moved to the Mississippi River town of Illinois, Quincy, Illinois. He dies. So here's our story. We have a woman with children of her own, but stepchildren with a man who's no longer there. How's that going to work out? And two of them in particular, Margaret and Clarissa, who we know here as Mary Ann and Eloise, numbers 6 and 7, they're not happy with their stepmother. There is tension. There is tension between Judith, or Nancy, if you will, and Mary Ann. Mary Ann is determined to get away from her stepmother. Mary Ann finds a man. There aren't a lot of them in Quincy, Illinois that she would know, but she found one and married him, and you know who she found? The little brother of her stepmother. Yes, she married Charles Bernard. That's the little brother of the stepmother she's trying to get away from. And her sister, Clarissa, marries a man named Robert Morcom in our story. James Franklin had him. And never mind the parents that he came from. This is a very upstanding, solid man. He's a regular, lower middle class working guy, if you will. Now, Mary Ann, or Margaret, and her husband, Edward, or Charles Bernard, they moved to Texas. They moved to South Dallas County, Texas. Operate a farm. It goes quite well. They will have no slaves at all. It was legal to, but no, this family's through with that. So no slaves at all. But they're highly respected in a Church of Christ-based community there, if you will. Her sister and her husband decide to come down from Missouri. He's a bricklayer. He works job by job. They decide to come down and see her sister, Margaret, and her family, and they do. And on that visit, her daughter, we're calling her Hazel, and the other families, Margaret's son, Teddy, fall in love and they elope. And yes, I'm telling you, my grandparents were first cousins. It was Oklahoma. It was Texas. What can I say? But yes, they did elope, and as you might imagine, things did not go too well with the stepmother/aunt and her niece/daughter-in-law, who was a year older than her own son. She was not happy with that, and in fact, it was a fair amount of stress for a while. Well, we move finally in chapter 8 there to Hazel, who is Mary Florence Hannum in my world. She now marries, married as we say, and they have 5 boys and 1 living girl. And that girl named Winona comes of age really in the early 1920s. Winona is, folks, a flapper. She's a flapper. She's got a church-going mother, and she's a flapper. And she is eventually going to marry and move to California. And we didn't see Winona much after that. We really didn't. At the bottom there is the rest of my family. You see my parents, Milo and Elizabeth. I'm over in the right-hand lower corner. That's me and my wife, and even got some kids below that, my sisters and I. I was much younger than my sisters. I often used to tell my students, it's a young country. My grandfather, on this chart, was born during the Civil War, and his grandfather was born just before the American Revolution. It's a young country, really, if you think about it. Okay, well, these are the stories, and yes, my grandmother really did talk to a woman from the Federal Writers Project. And yes, there is on record a long interview, and almost better than that, she wrote she called it a novel. We might call it a novella. It wasn't really that long. But it was about her romance with Charlie Boy, that's her husband, and the romance and the love that she had, and the troubles they had coming onto the prairie. They had to deal with the prairie. They'd live in a dugout. Whoa, a dugout made of dirt. She was afraid of Indians. There weren't really Indians in that area, but she was afraid of them. She was afraid of coyotes. It was a kind of a tough struggle. And my father came out of that, became an educator, and on to me, a college professor from Bethany College, I might add. Okay, enough of that. Would you like to ask either of us questions? She more about the writing, I'm more on the history side of things.
Okay, I'm coming. If you do have a question, just raise your hand and I will come to you with the microphone. Anybody have a question?
I just have a comment. I'm identifying with the and your families, because I happen to have two grandmothers, one of whom was named Oliver, and another one, let me think. Anyhow, they were just across the state line, both of them, different directions. So I'm enjoying this and pretending that some of them are my family.
Okay. We still have a good bit of time left. Anybody else have a question? Okay.
Okay, I had just one more thing to say.
Any other questions?
Yeah, can you take a few minutes to elaborate the association with St. Clairsville and your family? Can you reiterate a little bit of that about the St. Clair?
The troublesome couple had moved from what would be the west side of Washington, D.C. in those days, and they moved out this direction. He had moved down from Pennsylvania. They fell in love. She had a couple of children still in tow then. One was apprenticed off, so she had a couple of boys already, but they moved then, and for a while had a happy life by moving to Belmont County, where Justice of the Peace married them. That's in the records here. And in fact, if somebody cares to take it or take it to this library, the Belmont Library, here's the historical story of the county of Belmont's family, of the real life family, if you will. They struggled. She struggled. He struggled. And when they split up, he went to find another wife, as I say, 2 counties away. She carried on, and it seems very likely that her half-brother came through the area. One was living here, and one came through, and they were headed to Missouri. And she joined up with them, and her daughter in particular, her daughter married in Missouri, and she moved out there and eventually would live out her life in Missouri.
Any other questions?
How does your younger members of your family respond to this book and the history that you've pulled together?
I'd like
Were
to
there
tell
any
you they love it, but
surprises for them?
I think they've heard the stories before. They've not been jumping up and down, but yeah, they've all got copies. They'll be passed down. Yeah, and it is exciting for a historian to work with a literature person to get and flesh out some of these tales.
Did it take you to flesh out this history, and where all did you have to go in order to do it?
I'm a bit of an amateur genealogist. I've been working on it in 50 years, maybe. There was the round where you found a county history and biography in the back. There was the round where you discovered the Mormons and went to Salt Lake City. Then there was a round where you discovered the internet, and you began poking around, and then Ancestry.com came down from the clouds. And that and similar things. And before I was through the DNA, I laced together that couple that we talked about that lived in Belmont County. DNA tagged that one down for me. Yeah. I've worked with the DNA specialist out of Florida. Never met her, but gosh, we corresponded for 2 years. She's really good at what she does, and that's what we got. Yeah. Yeah.
Is she connected with the FBI?
No, but she is very much like that woman you see on TV occasionally who does DNA for criminal cases. Yeah, it's something like that. In fact, the matter is, I think she moved into this area. Or no, it was D.C. She moved to the D.C. area, I think. Yeah.
Okay, hold on one second. If you don't ask in the mic, the people listening online can't hear. That's why we do the mic.
Okay. I just want to know, have you been approached about a documentary or a movie?
We have not.
It's
We'd be
coming.
open to that discussion, but we have not.
Documentary, it's coming.
Okay, any other questions?
I just wanted to make one last comment. Okay, I'm maybe on to this.
Who had a question?
Did anyone hand down a genealogy or from any of the branches, or did you start it?
The real answer is that I started it. There were some bits that were helped here and there. A cousin in Oregon had some things, that sort of thing. But most of it was my work. I am a trained historian, so this is like a busman's holiday for me, you know.
I just want to say, first of all, thank all of you for coming, but don't be put off by all the spoilers you just heard. The book is different enough that it's still worth reading, even though it's not exactly the same exact dates and whatnot. But I think you can enjoy the book and not let the history, spoil it for you. So.
So where along this line did the cedar chests come in? Was it the great? Oh, you made.
But my grand. But my grandmother did write that novel and had that long interview, and that's where the substance of the chest came from.
Was there a cedar chest in? Was there a cedar chest in her?
She said, was there a cedar what did you say?
I said, did his grandmother have a cedar chest? I made it up for the book.
Oh, okay. I just wanted, there's folks listening on.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And it's being recorded, so I want
Oh,
everybody,
okay.
I want everybody to hear what you
Okay.
folks have to say. Any other questions? Okay, Dr. Manners and Dr. Bernard have their book for sale up here. You can purchase it after the program. Thank you both very much for presenting, and thank you all for coming.
I also have a single copy of my other two books if anybody wants one of those. These are spares. I brought them along. So.